Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. We all know there's a lot of data available, but Ruben Ugarte says the key is knowing how to use it. Ruben, thanks for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Bill.
Ruben, your book is entitled The Data Mirage. How did you come up with that title? What does that mean?
You know, I was talking to a colleague about the book and the title, and I wanted something that was unique. I kept seeing all these books that, had this futuristic look to them. And to me, there was something about data in the companies I was working for that they wanted it, but they couldn't seem to reach it. There was this gap between what they thought they could do and what they were actually doing. And it really, at one point, I think it reminded me of a mirage. You're walking in the desert and you think you see water, but you're not. And that's sort of where the analogy came from. And it's stuck. And I think a lot of people resonated with like, oh yeah, I get this. This is exactly what it feels like for us at our company.
Now, isn't this problem easy? Isn't it just the more data, the better? Let's keep piling it up, put it in baskets, put it in drawers, anything we can quantify. Isn't that better for us? And you're laughing, so I must be wrong.
Yes, I know. I think that's the assumption, but it's easier than ever to track data. And every company out there has data. Even your local coffee shop has all this transaction, customer data, and behavioral data around you. But the more you have, the trickier it is to actually use it. If you think about it, our capacity to consume information has really not changed, in hundreds, thousands of years. But now we have all this input coming at us at the companies on a personal basis. And this is what companies are dealing with. It's just a general sense of overwhelm as to how you actually use this to build a better business or increase profit or improve the customer experience.
Did I copy this down right? I take notes as I go through a book. And when I was going through your book, I wrote down the data-driven decision-making can actually limit your team and company. And again, you're smiling. So Is that the case, or do we all just fall into a trap?
Yes. I mean, look at this pandemic we're in, right? And a year ago, most health authorities had very little data as to how the virus actually worked, how it spread, what worked, what didn't. Now, a year later, we have much better sense of it. And yet lockdowns are very unusual. I'm here in Canada, and here in Canada, we're going into the sort of third wave lockdown. But there's data. It's not really a lack of data at this point. But how the data gets interpreted, it goes through all these different filters, whether it's political with something like the pandemic, or even a company. And for companies that are very data-driven, they pride themselves of saying, we make all decisions with data. The moment you run out of data, like a lot of businesses were last year, where you had no idea what was going to happen. You look at the tourism industry, no idea how to deal with such a drop in tourists. I saw a lot of clients and companies just completely get frozen, almost like, frozen, like a deer frozen in the headlights, because you have no data and you have no comfort making decisions without data. So data-driven is good until you run into issues like this.
Now, something else I wrote down, which seems to be just the opposite, so that's why we need you to explain it, that the biggest challenges we actually face in the world we're in with the data are related to people and psychology. I would think just the opposite. It would be the computer, the machines, the quantifying people who are sitting there using this data, but it's people and psychology. So again, we're going to need your explanation.
Yeah, technology is getting better every year. So the way you collect data, the way you store it, the way you even visualize it, everything you do with technology is really much easier today than it was a year ago and 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And if we look 5 years from now, all the technology is going to be even easier. It's despite integration problems and implementation issues and so on, it's all getting really much easier. And we can see that companies, of course, are drowning in data. So the ease of collecting it is not really an issue for companies. But how it actually gets used in the companies, that's still a major issue. I still come across people in client companies who have an aversion to math, for example, just basic math, basic statistics. And if you don't have that level of comfort, it's going to be really hard to work with any kind of data. So all this data is coming into companies, but a lot of them don't have a good idea as to how this will get turned into insights and then into something that is tangible for the business. And that is really a question of psychology on the people side and a process, how the data is going to get interpreted.
And that's a great segue, I guess, now, because there's so much data always coming out, and it would seem to be obvious that everybody should say, oh, it's the white hat data or the black hat data, and yet we actually get on different sides of it, what to do, whether to take a medicine, not, whether to intermingle, say 6 feet, 3 feet, 12 feet apart, et cetera, et cetera. Have you been busier than ever because of this, because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think my work, of course, is somewhat evergreen. Data is always needed in good times, bad times. But you mentioned a great point. In the pandemic, of course, everyone sort of interprets the facts a little bit different. Some people say, of course, we're going to have to wear a mask, get a vaccine. Other people say, that's crazy. How can you look at the numbers and think you have to wear a mask? But, it's the same numbers. And the same thing happens in companies. Everyone's interpreting a result from a campaign or a result from a product launch in a slightly different way. There's actually a fantastic book called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's an old book. It must be 30 years old, from the 80s and 90s. And he just looks at all these common ways we see statistics in our lives. Things like 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this toothpaste, things like that. And we just sort of take it for granted. But numbers can be tweaked and changed in any way possible. And at companies, it's not really a malicious process. It's not someone trying to get the net over someone else. It's very natural, but it does happen automatically. And that's where some training, some awareness needs to happen. So people know that it's not just facts. And if you just give facts to people, then you'll just be fine. There's this entire interpretation based on biases and our preferences. And we have to deal with it.
It's interesting for all the information that you're telling us about this. And I love, there's a saying you had in your book, and I think it could be the title of your next book, but it should be something that literally is on the wall. We see all those motivational sayings, but you said, look for cause, not blame. And that just seems so obvious and makes so much sense. So, of course, we won't do it because it's too obvious and makes too much sense. But I guess that's the root of everything with all this data. If we can find something that's really related to it, I could say I play my best baseball in the daytime. Well, if I don't have lights, of course, because I can't see the ball at night. But some things can be, as you said, you can, what was the title of that book? How to Lie with Statistics, or Prove Anything You Wish. Is that the root of this, trying to get to the core? And in other words, filtering out the data and finding the good material in there that's really going to take a business sky high?
Yeah, exactly. There's two things. Yeah, what you mentioned about sorting through it and finding those insights that make sense, that are statistically valid, that actually have some use to your business. And those things can be taught, right? It's not a black box magic that you need someone, with a sort of special intuition or like a futurist, that can sort of see into the future. It's a matter of some basic skills around statistics and numbers and probabilities, business strategy, and then aligning the data with that. But the second thing, I think, is also realizing that data and analytics is really just a tool for a company. And like any tool, there's situations where you want to use it and situations where you don't. There's a saying of sometimes people sort of get hammers, and then once you have a hammer, then everything's a nail to you. But some things, of course, it should be used by a screwdriver. So in some companies, at some situations or decisions are well suited for data and research and a very data-driven approach. And other things might not be. Other things you might have to do the opposite of what the data is saying. I had a client where they have really good numbers on the marketing side in terms of driving leads, but the conversion down the funnel in terms of actual customers was quite low. So we had to say, hey, yes, the numbers say things are good at the top of the funnel, but we know that's not true. We need to be able to dive a little bit deeper, change how we report those numbers, change how we approach the data, because it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about hitting some artificial number. We have to take into account other things, like maybe what the customer thinks.
Ruben, before we go further, I'd like to let our audience know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Ruben Ugarte, Ugarte. He's the author of the book, The Data Mirage. And Ruben, will you tell us where we can get the book and a website where we can find out more information?
Yeah, the book is available everywhere you can buy books. That's Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, Chapters in Canada, BAM. I saw it at Google Play Store. And my website is rubenugarte.com. That's RUBENUGARTE.com.
And we'll, of course, give that information again. It's the kind of book we particularly like on this show. It's brief. It's to the point. I think it's about 150 pages, but we know how important data is and why spend time going down a wrong road, like having misdirections to a location. You've been there. You do that. This is what you do every day. So even a few of the hints that you can give us can certainly save us a lot of time and make us lots of money in the long run. So that's what we're looking for here. Is there a company that you would tell us to focus on, or ones that we would be familiar with that do it right with data, and why is it? What is it about them that they're doing correctly?
Yeah, there's a few, but let me mention one that always comes to mind, and it will be Spotify, which is the music playing technology company. And I think they're doing a few things right, in no particular order. One thing they do, and we know this because the employees have done public presentations on how the company handles data, how they think about data. One thing they do well is they democratize access to the data. And this just simply means that everyone in the company is able to access the data. That is, they have the permissions to look at the data in the company, and they have the skills to do it. So they have either the right technology to be able to create reports or dashboards, or they might have technical skills to be able to query data from a database. So they make this easily available. You don't have to go through a gatekeeper or a special person or some kind of just friction to get data. The second thing is they have also started using data to predict the future, which is sort of the most advanced way of using data. And this is really the world of AI, data science, which is incredibly popular right now. And Spotify does this by creating playlists for you. If you sort of think about the product, the main challenge you'll likely have here is making your own playlist so you can play your own music. Spotify gives you all these playlists that are generated by AI and machine learning based on your tastes and preferences. That's really helpful for an average user. And the third thing they do is they have built their own frameworks around how to use it. So in my book, I give several frameworks on how to think about data. But I really think companies should take these ideas, whether mine or someone else's, and create them and make them their own. You maybe even rename the steps to match the language of the company and the culture. So Spotify has done this. And that, I think, makes a framework much more likely to stick once you sort of put it into the words of how you or your company thinks about things.
You mentioned the people who, I guess, take this data and filter it, get the essence out of it, etc.
Yeah.
Are those, how am I going to say this, specially trained people, or do you find that you look toward mathematicians, or are psychologists better? Or it might seem counterintuitive, but maybe music majors see this whole thing better than all of us. What have you found? Because these are the people you're working with every day.
Yeah, there's a few categories. I would say you'll have data analysts, a role that's been around for a very long time. And they're really focused on creating reports and dashboards. The best data analysts have a business understanding of the data. That is, it's not just the ability to create a chart or a report. They understand that, this is how it ties into the overall strategy of this quarter, and this number makes sense. And they understand human behavior. So they can look at, data points and know, what, the reason why this number drops on the weekends is because people are not at work and our product is a work product. Things like that. Sort of simple things, but very important for context. Then I think you also have data scientists, which is, again, the sort of the realm of AI, machine learning. And those are much more heavy on mathematics, much more heavy on statistics. It's really a much more intensive coding job, very high in demand, quite tricky to find at this moment. The market hasn't really caught up to the demand over the past few years. And then for everyone else, where you're trying to build in just an average marketing person or salesperson or operations, it's just a general understanding of data, of numbers, how they work, how they should be analyzed and thought about, and how to do it quickly. So this is not your full-time job. You want to be able to get in and get out when it comes to your numbers.
When you first said data analyst, I was going to say that the best person for that is a mom. She looks at the kitchen table and sees two sandwiches, and she said, at 12 o'clock, my two children are going to be hungry. They left their lunch here today. She's analyzing the data. She picks it up. She walks over to the school or drives over, gives them the sandwiches. So that might be a separate field all in itself, and it might be the answer to my next question. I love new and interesting terms, and early on in your book, you say that companies are looking for unicorn talent. What is that?
The unicorn word is typically associated with companies that have a valuation of over $1 billion, mostly in the technology space. But unicorn talent is something I had a client describe to me, and they just say, you know what, like, we're trying to find people who understand data, but they also know how to do their own job, a marketing job in this case. So I think unicorn talent is someone who has some of the skills you mentioned, almost like the mom, where they're very good at what they do, their domain expertise, maybe marketing, maybe product, sales, but they also have this other skills that really complement them. They can come in, they can look at the data and say, you know what, that's unusual, or we should explore that further. They may have their own technical skills, so they're self-sufficient. So instead of having someone create a report for them, they can do it themselves if you just give them the data. And then they're, of course, proactive. And proactive in the sense of thinking, this is not just my job and my field, my domain, but here's what this means for the company in a broader sense. And here's what it means for our strategy. And this thing that no one's talking about that I just saw in the data, I should definitely bring that up and make sure it gets covered because it's important. So all those different skills, I think, fall into this idea of unicorn talent. And companies find it hard to find this person out of the box, of course. But of course, you can train some of those skills with the right program or approach.
And that was the thing I was going to ask you too. Do companies have training sections or sessions for this? Is that good to take a learned person, let's say an Ivy League graduate, who's obviously a bright, intelligent person, and say, now we want to see if you're adaptable? Again, just like they might do for a musician, and say, you have no talent, go over to this. Would that be viable, or is that something companies do, or not at all?
I think they do. And, I find if a person has the enthusiasm or the willingness, the word we might want to use, I find you can teach a lot of skills. And data is no exception. I've gone through many training sessions where I've taken people who have no inclinations towards data. They never think about it. They might be scared of it or scared of, being sort of thrown back to some kind of mathematics course in college, which they hated, and able to find some ways in which you actually work with numbers without feeling so overwhelming or so burdensome. So you can definitely do that. And there's definitely a few ways of structuring that training and making it impactful and making it relevant.
Is there a company you can, or an example you can give us where someone had a lot of data, but actually kind of keyed on the wrong data and it took them in the wrong direction, or at least misled them for a while?
Yeah, I'll give you an example on a consumer technology company, but the example is very common. I've seen it multiple times. They had great data, actually, great visibility into the product, into where users were coming from a marketing perspective, and then what they were doing when they actually signed up and created an account for this product, a software product. And when I came in, I looked at the data. We did some audits to make sure that all the numbers were correct. And it was clear to me right away that the retention was quite low, below any industry standard, any benchmark. So to me, it seems like, this was sort of the classic leaky bucket. You were trying to pour water as fast as possible, but the bucket was leaking so much water that it was a pointless task. So I brought that up and we started talking about it. They also knew that. They knew that retention wasn't as high as it could be. And then yet they really wanted to talk about acquisition and think, how can we improve acquisition? So their approach was, if we improve acquisition, we'll improve retention, which doesn't quite work like that. So I see the examples all the time where there seems to be an area that's completely sticking out. Your retention is quite poor, or perhaps your acquisition is quite poor, or perhaps your customer satisfaction is quite low. And yet you're sort of working in this completely different area that what the data says. And that's, I think, comes back to that psychology element of what are we really doing here? Are we trying to tackle the thing that the data says, or that we that we should be doing, or are we just applying some kind of filter or bias to what we think we should be doing?
Ruben, once again, I'd like to let our audience know that if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Ruben Ugarte, Ugarte. He's the author of The Data Mirage. And Ruben, again, we're going to ask you the question, where can we get the book? And tell us about that website where we kind of titillate ourselves and get more information.
Yeah, the book is available everywhere you can buy books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, BAM, and any other bookstore you might come across. And the website is rubenugarte.com. And there's also a link in that website there to there's other retailers where you can buy the book.
And it's always easy. It's fun listening to our guests as they talk, but to our audience, if you take a few seconds to go out to that website and check it out, this might be just the problem you're having. And as Ruben said, sometimes people focus on the wrong part of the problem and think this will cure it, and maybe it's something else. So today might be your lucky day if you get the right data. Ruben, I think you have something called a data proficiency level in 5 categories to rank your company on this. Can you tell us what that is? I think we were kidding before about page 7 in your book, but can you tell our audience what we should be looking at?
Yeah, so it's really an assessment for companies to understand their proficiency with data. And the reason why I created this from my client work is companies tend to do well on some categories and not so well on others. So we want to understand what those are, remove the ambiguity, the ambiguity of we're not data driven. I'm not even sure what to do with that. But if we could break it down to categories, which is what the assessment does, then it's much easier to tackle it. So, we can talk about technology. How well do we use technology? We can talk about people. Are they trained enough? We can talk about how decisions are made. We can talk about the process of how an insight or how data is converted into an insight. And we go through those different levels and rate our team, maybe the company in general. So you might have different ratings for different teams or different parts of the company. And then that gives you a starting point as to where you should focus. You might need better technology, or you might need some training on decision-making frameworks. So people understand how decisions are made. That's really what that assessment is meant to do. What's
the biggest challenge you face when you're called into a company? Do people want too much data? Do they say, look, I don't have enough time for more of these computer reports. We got reports up the wazoo. You're laughing. So I'm guessing I'm hitting on something that's prevalent.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is trying to get to the root cause as to what's actually happening. Every company that reaches out to me has an opinion of what should be done, right? I just saw an email this morning in my inbox that said, hey, we came across your content. We would love it if you could run a workshop for us. And maybe so. Maybe a workshop is really what's needed. But in some cases, it's not. And I need to be able to find that, and perhaps even tougher, convince the prospect or the company that this is not what they need, right? That this one training session is not really going to get them to where they want to go. They might need something else completely that might be shorter or might be longer. I'm not sure. But trying to get that from companies. And I find companies, for example, will tend to reach out for technology. We need your help selecting technology. But then when I talk to them, I realize, technology will help, no doubt, but your people are not ready for this. They do not want data. They do not have time to do it. We have to sort of work through that first. And that is a completely different approach than just technology.
I realized just an incident I was involved with today with an insurance claim. And I'm thinking, what is it that makes me wander to deal with this office or another office, et cetera? And I think this goes across the span for myself and a lot of people. It's simplicity. If you can make my life easier in something that I'm afraid might be complicated, filling out an insurance form, a medical form, something like that, and it's almost very obvious. Does that happen a lot, that you walk into a company and they're looking for a mountain of data, and you just say to them, your parking lot is 3 blocks away and I walked in the rain. If you could put a parking lot closer, or if you had a nicer person at the door, or if you just made my life a little easier, I would love to come here and deal with this doctor, lawyer, whatever the company is. Is that something that kind of pops up, or do you not see that?
Yeah, on 2 points there, on the data itself, I tell clients that they really want to make the data something that people trip on it, metaphorically speaking. So they want to make it available everywhere. That is, it's not just a dashboard that you access on your computer. It's also available on your mobile device. It's in your email as a digest or a summary. It's in your communication tools like a Slack or Microsoft Teams. It's maybe an offline report. So you make it easy enough that everyone trips on it and that they're more comfortable with it. And that's, I think, part of the how do you make it easier for people to get familiar and use the data? Just put it in front of them in a format that is digestible. And the second point I'll make, I think these little things that you mentioned are sometimes missed. And this is where there needs to be something than just data, right? Maybe the number said that by putting the parking lot 3 blocks away was the most efficient way of building or constructing this specific element of the store. But if you have a general, maybe business understanding, a qualitative approach, you realize that makes no sense for the customer. So you should disregard the data and do what's fair for the customer. I'll tell you, I'm sure you've been to banks. And you know how banks, they have a pen, and the pen has a little string or like a metal thing attached to it.
Your keychain, yeah, right.
The keychain, yeah. It kind of makes sense logically, right? I'm sure when they came up with it, they don't want to lose the pen, so they put a keychain to it. But it may also have the wrong message to customers that tells them, we don't trust you with this, pen, so we're going to put a keychain to it because we don't want you to take it. So little things like that may be coming across, and the data may say one thing, but the common sense may say another.
And I guess that's why we need the people factor. And as you talk about the psychology and working with people, what is it really resonates with them, et cetera, et cetera. Ruben, is there a message you want to leave with our audience concerning data, that whether it's a small dental office or a several thousand person company, something that they should know about? And we give you all of 15 seconds to tell us.
Yeah, I would say, treat data appropriately. It's great in some situations, in some decisions, and in some other ones, you need common sense. You need other things. So just find a way to make data easily digestible in your company, whatever that may mean. And just remember that if it's not helping you grow your business, then it's not something you should be worrying about too much.
And what was it I said earlier? I'm looking for that saying again. Look for cause, not blame. Instead of blaming somebody, find the cause. And if you can't find it, call our guest, Ruben Ugarte. The book is The Data Mirage. And once again, Ruben, give us the website and where we can get it.
Yeah, book is available everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, BAM, Chapters. And the website, there's a link as well, is rubenugarte.com.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for making our companies better and life a little better thanks to data. I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.